Picture this. You've been sat on the bank for ages, put your heart and soul into your burley and cast right into the sweet spot. Then finally, you get a solid bite. You strike only to reel in another tiny little tiddler, no bigger than your thumb. Frustrating, isn't it? Well, what if I told you that your perfect aromatic burley isn't actually attracting the big boys, but is basically screaming at them to get lost? Sounds a bit mad, I know. But for most fishers, it's the cold, hard truth. In this video, we're breaking down 20 massive stuff-ups that turn your feeder into a free feed for the small fry and a total nightmare for any trophy carp or big bream. Most importantly, I'm going to show you how to fix it. Stick around to the end and your fishing game will change forever. Before we get into the mistakes, let's have a look at what's actually going on under the surface. You've got to understand the psychology.
The small fry, the little tackers, are always starving. They're everywhere, and they're bold as brass. They're all about the smash and grab. Any cloud of bait or strong scent is a green light for them to swarm. They don't care about a crowd because there's thousands of them. But the big fellas, they're a different breed. We're talking about the old-timers, the ones that have dodged every net and hook in the drink. They didn't get big by being stupid. They're cautious, and they value their peace. To them, a bunch of small fish going mental or some weird, unnatural smell on the bottom isn't a dinner invite. It's a massive red flag. Our goal isn't to throw a rowdy pub feed for every fish in the pond. It's to open a quiet, high-end restaurant for the VIPs. Once you get that through your head, you're halfway to catching a monster. Righto, let's talk about the number one mistake people make: grinding your burley way too fine. Now, heaps of fishos, especially the blokes just starting out, reckon that the finer the mix, the better it is. They'll spend ages milling breadcrumbs and grain into a powder, thinking that cloud is the secret sauce. And look, they're right about the cloud, but that's exactly the problem. That fine mist is a total magnet for all the small fry and bait stealers. Those tiny particles just hang there in the water column, creating a massive beacon for every undersized fish in the area. They swarm the spot and pick the water clean before your bait can even touch the bottom. So what happens when a big bream or a solid unit cruises past? He sees all that frantic splashing and realizes there's nothing but dust to eat, so he keeps on swimming. Big fish want something substantial on the deck, not a mouthful of mist. Remember, your burley needs some decent, chunky bits that'll sit on the bottom and stay there. Think of it like this. If you're starving, are you looking for a thick, chunky beef stew or just a glass of tomato juice? Exactly. Give the big fellas a proper feed, not just a smell. The second big mistake flows right on from the first, going way too heavy on those dusty ingredients. We're talking powdered milk, cocoa, egg powder, and those cloud makers or geyser additives you see at the tackle shop. Sure, they create a massive visual impact. Your feeder hits the deck and lets off a thick cloud that looks like it'd pull in every fish for miles. No, we've already talked about exactly which fish that actually attracts. This gear is fine for match fishing when you just want a quick bag of tiddlers. But if you're hunting a real trophy, it's a total deal breaker. Think of it like cranking up loud pop music and strobe lights in a five-star restaurant. You'll attract a crowd of rowdy teenagers, but the serious guests are just going to turn around and walk out. The big fellas want their tucker sitting quietly on the bottom. A tiny bit of haze as your burley breaks down is fine, but a massive, non-stop pillar of dust is basically a red flag. Keep those dusty components to a minimum, or better yet, skip them entirely if you're serious about landing a proper monster. Now let's have a yarn about scents. Mistake number 3 is going way too heavy on the sweet, candy-like smells in your ground bait. You know the ones: vanilla, caramel, strawberry, tutti frutti. Walk into any tackle shop and the shelves are absolutely groaning with these sugary syrups and sprays. And look, they do work. Now you've got to ask yourself, what are they actually catching? It's usually just the tiddlers, those small greedy fish that aren't picky. For a little roach or a silver, a sweet smell is just a signal for an easy, high-energy feed. But a wise old bream or a solid carp, they're a bit more suspicious. As they get older, their tastes change. They start looking for something a bit more complex, more natural, even something a bit stinky. We're talking fishy, meaty or spicy aromas, things like coriander, pepper or even garlic. That's what's going to get a real monster interested. Think about it like this. Kids love lollies and fairy floss, but as an adult, you'd much rather a feed of roast meat or a fresh coffee. So stop feeding the fish candy. Give them something a bit more serious and natural, and you'll be blown away by the results. Keeping on with the theme of scents, let's talk about mistake number 4. Using those harsh, chemical-heavy attractants. I'm talking about those cheap, super concentrated liquids and sprays you see everywhere. Manufacturers often pack these with aggressive chemicals just to get a punchy, long-lasting smell that appeals to us. But here's the thing, a fish's sense of smell is hundreds, if not thousands of times more sensitive than ours. What smells like a tasty snack to you can feel like a full-on chemical attack to a fish. Think of it like walking into a tiny room where someone's just dumped a whole bottle of cheap cologne. Your first instinct is to bolt for fresh air. Well, that's exactly how a big, wary fish feels. An unnaturally strong scent doesn't trigger their appetite. It triggers their alarm bells. They know nothing in the wild smells that intense, so they reckon it's a trap and head the other way. You're much better off sticking with natural scents. Go for things like grain broths, oils, or extracts from worms and maggots. And if you're using high-quality gear from trusted brands, use it sparingly. Just remember the golden rule. It's always better to underdo it than to overdo it. Keep it subtle, mate. Mistake number 5 is a boring one-dimensional burley. Even if you've ditched the fine dust, if your whole mix is made of the same sized bits, like just breadcrumbs and crushed corn, you're doing it wrong. A mix like that fills up the small fry way too fast, and then they're gone. But more importantly, it won't keep a decent-sized fish interested for long. To a big fish, a uniform mush is just boring. There's nothing to pick through, nothing to investigate. They'll quickly realize there's no real prize here and move on to find a better buffet. Your burley should be more like a chunky muesli or a proper salad, not a bowl of runny porridge. It needs a variety of sizes, different weights, and different textures. You want some bits that break down fast, and others that just sit on the bottom waiting for a taker. This forces the fish to really get in there and forage, rooting around for the best bits. It keeps them in your spot longer, they lose their guard, and that's exactly what we're after. Now this leads us to the 6th, and probably the biggest mistake, not putting enough chunky, nutritious bits in your burley. These chunks are the anchors that actually stop a big unit in its tracks and keep it feeding. See, breadcrumbs and ground grains are really just the transport, the base that gets the goods down to the bottom, but the real feast should be stuff the little pickers can't just inhale. I'm talking about corn, boiled peas, barley, different-sized pellets, chopped-up boilies, or even live bait, and that's exactly what those trophy fish are after. When a big fella sees a spread of safe, solid food on the bottom, he'll settle in and get to work. The tiddlers might hang around the edges eating the dust, but the main course stays there for the boss. If your mix is missing those big bits, a trophy fish might turn up for the smell, but he won't find anything worth staying for, and he'll just cruise on by.
So don't be stingy, chuck in the kind of stuff you'd practically want to eat yourself.
Mistake number 7 is a real shocker, and it's all about how you prep your big particles. We're talking corn, peas, wheat, or barley. Now, a lot of fishos get impatient. They just splash some boiling water over the grains or don't cook 'em long enough, leaving 'em hard as a rock. Here's the deal. You chuck that stuff in the water, and sure, it smells all right, but the fish can't actually chew it. And if they do manage to bolt some down, it's going to give 'em a nasty gut ache. You aren't attracting fish. You're actually teaching 'em that your spot is full of rubbish tucker. They'll remember that and steer clear next time. Your grains need to be soft enough to squash easily between your thumb and finger. When they're cooked right, they soak up all those juicy attractants and become impossible for a fish to resist. So don't cut corners. Spend that extra hour boiling them up properly or letting them soak in a thermos. Do it right, and the fish will pay you back with a screaming reel. Mistake number 8, and even the old hands get this one wrong, ignoring the live stuff. We're all out there chasing the latest fancy pellets, boilies and liquids, but we often forget what the fish actually want to eat in the wild. I'm talking about maggots and chopped up worms. Adding these to your burley can be a total game changer. First off, it's a massive dinner bell. The scent and taste of real protein beats artificial flavors every single time. Second, it's the movement. Having larvae wriggling around on the bottom creates those tiny vibrations and a visual signal that a big fish just can't ignore. It kicks their natural instincts into gear. Sure, the tiddlers love the live stuff too, but they fill up fast. A massive bream or a solid carp, though, they'll hang around for hours, picking out every last worm. Yeah, it costs a bit more, but sometimes just a handful of chopped worms in your feeder is what gets you that trophy of a lifetime. Don't go cheap on the one thing the fish are looking for every day in their own backyard. Mistake number 9, your mix is just way too busy. We've already had a yarn about those dusty bits, but there are heaps of other ways to get your ground bait moving through the water column. You've got your geysers, pop-up bits, and hemp seeds that start floating up the second the feeder breaks open. Look, that's spot on if you're trying to snag fish mid-water, like active roach or rudd. But for the big, wary fellas down deep, it's a real headache. Think about it from the perspective of a big bream. You're trying to have a quiet feed on the deck, and suddenly there's a bloody fireworks show going off right over your head. It creates a massive ruckus, brings in all the annoying tiddlers, and makes the big ones suspicious. The big trophies want a bit of peace and quiet. They're looking for a proper smorgasbord neatly laid out on the bottom. If you're after a real monster, your mix needs to be inert. That means once it hits the deck, it stays put, slowly breaking down and letting the scent do the heavy lifting instead of exploding and throwing bits all over the shop. Mistake number 10 is one a lot of fish shows don't even think about: getting the color of your burley wrong. We usually pick it based on the smell or the ingredients, but the color is just as important, especially in clear water when the fish are a bit skittish. Think about it. The bottom of most spots is usually a dark grey, brown or green. If you drop a massive bright yellow or red patch right on top of that, it stands out like a sore thumb. To a big wary fish, that looks suspicious. It's like a warning sign screaming, "Stay away, something's not right." The pros always try to match their burley to the color of the bottom. They'll use dark dyes or even just mix in some local soil or clay. A dark burley on the dark bottom doesn't spook the fish. They feel safe and feed naturally. If you want to use bright colors, keep them for your hook bait so it stands out against the spread. But the main feed, that should be camouflaged. Honestly, just darkening your burley can completely change your luck for the day. Number 11 on the list is a classic mistake: overwetting your mix. Now, you might reckon a bit of extra water won't hurt, but trust me, it'll absolutely kill your session. If your burley's too wet, it turns into a thick, gluggy mess, basically like modeling clay. It might look all right when you're packing it into the feeder, but once it hits the bottom, it just sits there like a dead weight. No scent, no trail, nothing. Fish could be cruising right past, but they won't get a sniff of it. If you're lucky, it might break down by the time you're packing up to go home. If you're not, it'll just sit there and go sour, which actually scares the fish away. What you're after is a mix that's nice and fluffy. It should hold a shape when you squeeze it, but crumble apart the second you give it a light tap. That's the sweet spot. It stays in the feeder until it hits the deck, then starts working straight away, spreading out and calling the fish in. So, take your time. Add your water bit by bit, give it a good mix, and you'll be golden. Mistake 12 is the other side of the coin, underwetting your burley. And trust me, it's just as much of a headache. If your mix is too dry, it's not going to bind. You go to cast, and the whole ball just disintegrates mid-air. Or if you're using a feeder, the burley's going to spill out the second it hits the water, or while it's still sinking. The result? You aren't getting that tight feed spot on the bottom. The current just carries your mix away, scattering it over a massive area. Sure, you'll attract every little picker in the neighborhood, but you won't be able to pin them down in one spot. More importantly, you've got no hope of holding the big fellas on a spread that thin. A big fish isn't going to bother chasing tiny crumbs across a huge paddock. It wants a proper plate of food, not just a few scraps on a massive tablecloth. That's why getting that moisture balance bang on is so crucial. Your burley needs to be wet enough to reach the bottom in one piece, but loose enough to start working once it's down there. It takes a bit of practice to get the hang of it, but it's easily one of the most vital skills in your tackle box. Number 13 is a classic mistake for those chilly sessions in early spring or late autumn, going way too heavy on the scents when the water's cold. There's a bit of a myth going round that you need a massive stink to wake up sluggish fish. No, honestly, it's the exact opposite. In cold water, a fish's metabolism slows right down, they get lazy and pretty cautious. While scents don't travel as fast in the cold, they actually stay concentrated in one spot for much longer. If your burley is too strong, it hits them like a chemical blast. It feels unnatural and just ends up spooking them. Think of the bush after a bit of rain, those light, subtle, earthy smells. That's exactly how your bait should be. In cold water, the less is more rule is absolute gold. Stick to delicate, natural aromas, or just let the ingredients do the talking. Sometimes the best burley is the one you can barely even smell yourself. Mistake number 14 is getting the nutritional balance of your ground bait wrong. A lot of the cheaper mixes out there are mostly fast-burning carbs. We're talking breadcrumbs, bran, and crushed biscuits. Sure, they smell great and get the fish fired up early, but they fill them up far too quickly. The small fries stuff themselves on these empty calories and then disappear. Meanwhile, the big boys, especially when they're looking for protein to bulk up, won't find anything worth their time. If you want to hold a trophy fish in your swim, you need protein, whether it's high-quality fish meal, krill meal, or crushed pellets. These ingredients send a clear signal that there's a proper meal on offer. They'll stick around much longer if they know they're getting the good stuff. Stop thinking of your ground bait as just a snack and start treating it like a full-on feed. Mistake 15 comes down to your burley game. Now, a lot of fishers, especially the feeder brigade, try to keep their burley in a tiny, tight little spot, hitting the same exact mark every single cast. If you're chasing tiddlers in a competition, fair enough. But if you are after a real trophy, that tactic can backfire. Picture this: a big, wary old slab cruises up to your spot and sees a perfect, unnatural mound of food sitting there. It's going to spook him. In the real world, food doesn't just pile up like that. A big fella feels way more comfortable if the tucker is spread out a bit, like a natural feeding ground. So, when you're laying down your base, don't be afraid to spread your casts out a touch. You're looking to create a feeding zone maybe a meter or two wide, rather than just a tiny bullseye. This lets the fish move in from any angle without getting skittish. They'll start mooching around your dinner table, feeding more confidently, and that's when they're way more likely to stumble onto your hook bait and really commit. Mistake number 16. Overlooking a plain, inert base. Look, sometimes your main job isn't to create a massive cloud of scent and flavor. Sometimes you just need to get the heavy hitters, like corn, peas, and pellets, straight to the bottom. This is a big one when you're fishing in a ripping current or a spot absolutely crawling with tiddlers. See, if you mix those big bits with a super active, high attraction burley, the current's going to wash half of it away before your feeder even hits the deck, and you'll end up attracting every pesky small fry in the area. That's where our poor, heavy base saves the day. The simplest and most effective way to do this is just using plain old garden soil or riverbank clay. By mixing your chunky feed with a heavy filler, you're making sure that bait actually makes it to the bottom. Dirt doesn't have a strong smell and it won't cloud up much, so it doesn't grab the attention of the small stuff. But when a big unit swims by, they're definitely going to notice that spread of tasty grains and pellets waiting for them. It's a tactic for the patient angler, but there's nothing better for weeding out the pickers and landing the real prize. Mistake 17 is sticking to the old idea that your hook bait has to be a dead ringer for your burley. Now, there's some logic there. The fish get used to the feed and lose their guard, which often works a treat. But what happens when you've got a school of big ones right on the spot, feeding hard, and you're still not getting a bite? It usually means your hook bait is just getting lost among hundreds of other tasty bits. In a spot like that, you actually want to do the opposite. You need to make your bait stand out from the rest of the spread, make it pop. So, how do you do it? One way is to go with a bright, contrasting color. If you're burleying with yellow corn, try a red or white one on the hook. You could also use a pop-up to keep the bait hovering just off the bottom, or give it a real scent boost by soaking it in a concentrated dip. That one little standout bait is often exactly what it takes to finally trigger a strike. Number 18 is ignoring the clock, basically being way too impatient. See, burley isn't a magic wand. It doesn't work the second it hits the water. You've laid out a cracking spread on the bottom, but here's how it actually plays out. First, the tiddlers show up. They start a bit of a frenzy, and all that commotion eventually draws in the bigger fish, but a real trophy? He might take an hour, maybe even 2, to show his face. He'll sit back in the shadows, sussing out the situation. If everything stays quiet and the tucker doesn't look suspicious, he'll eventually move in to feed. Now, a lot of fishers make a classic mistake. If they don't get a hit in the first 30 minutes, they start overthinking it, adding more scents, changing their rig, or constantly recasting. All that fussing just spooks the big fellas that were likely already watching from the sidelines. You've got to settle in for the long haul. The best tactic is simply patience. Just sit tight and let the burley do its job. Mistake number 19 is blindly copying those competition burley recipes. We've all seen the videos of the tournament blokes and tried to mirror exactly what they're doing, but we're missing the forest for the trees. The goal of a pro is miles away from a weekend warrior looking for a trophy. See, a pro just needs to bag as many fish as possible before the clock runs out. They're happy with any tail, doesn't matter if it's a tiny sprat or a tiddler. That's why their burley is super active, clouds up the water, and reeks of strong scents. It's designed to get every fish in the area into a mad feeding frenzy, but our goal is different. We want that one big lunker. We don't want all that chaos and noise. We want a bit of quiet and a high-quality feed that'll keep a big fish hanging around. So, using those pro recipes for trophy fishing doesn't just miss the mark. it actually ruins your chances. It does the exact opposite of what you want by attracting all the small bait thieves you're trying to avoid. By all means, learn from the pros, but always tweak it to suit your own target. Remember, trophy fishing isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. And finally, number 20, the absolute biggest clanger you can make is being scared to experiment. Look, there's no such thing as a magic burley recipe that'll work every single time, no matter where you are. Every spot is different. In one dam, the fish might be mad for strawberry, but in the next one over, they won't touch anything but garlic. On one river, the bream might want a dark mix, while somewhere else they'll only go for the light stuff. Fish change their minds constantly depending on the season, the weather, and what they're already eating. The worst mistake you can make is finding one decent recipe and sticking to it for years without changing a thing. Real fishing is a constant game of trial and error, so don't be shy, give it a crack. Chuck in a weird spice, change the color, or try a different texture. Think about your results. What did the job today? Was it different to last week? Keep a logbook and write down what you see. It's only the legends who keep learning and aren't afraid to ditch the rulebook that'll consistently land the big ones. Your best burley is the one you've built yourself through heaps of practice, specifically for your own local honey hole. So what's the go then? All this time we've been splashing out on the priciest scents and the flashiest gear. We might have actually been spooking the very fish we're after. It's true, landing a real monster isn't about huge clouds of muck or over-the-top smells. Big fish aren't looking for louder and sweeter, they're looking for smarter and steadier. Let's break it down. If you want your burley to be a magnet for the big units rather than the small fry, focus on a coarser mix. Use subtle, natural scents. Keep your mix heavy so it stays on the bottom, match your colors to the deck, and most importantly, have a bit of patience. Your goal is to lay out a proper, safe, and decent spread on the floor that only the biggest and wisest fish in the drink will appreciate. Cheers for watching. If you've picked up a few tips today, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next Secrets from the Water. Now a question for you. What's the biggest shocker you've pulled with your burley in the past? Or maybe you've got a secret ingredient for those trophies. Drop a comment below. I'd love to have a yarn with you. See you out there.